In 1994, Boesmansgat, or Bushman's Hole, was considered a serene swimming spot located on a private reserve in the stunning countryside of Northern Cape in South Africa. It had, until now, not really been the scene of much drama, but diving enthusiasts discovered just how deep the water in the cave went and set about to try and explore the murky depths below. This triggered a series of events that linked to a group of divers in a tragic twist of fate that cost at least 2 of them their lives and ruined the lives of many others. This is the story of how Dave Shaw, the daredevil pilot and diver that sought to ease a family's pain, ended in tragedy itself. This is the Bushman Hole cave diving disaster. Boesmansgat Cave, otherwise known as Bushman's Hole, is an enormous cave of fresh water located underground in a sinkhole on the privately owned Mount Carmel Game Farm in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. It is believed to have a depth of over 283 metres or 928 feet and was, for some time, thought to be the biggest open-air gat or cave entrance in the world. On normal days, there are a number of tours taking place for snorkelers and tourists to have a splash or swim in the water that's around 3 million years old. Surrounded by stunning scenery and often bathed in glorious sunshine, it's a perfect spot to take a dip on holiday, and you can even snorkel around the water and take a look around the shallows. But Bushman's Hole is also one of the toughest diving caves on the face of the earth, and holds the tragic stories and deaths of numerous divers within its dark, nightmarish depths. It's considered a particularly difficult dive because, unlike other similar caves, it's located nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, meaning that it's the equivalent to diving almost twice the depths of the sea. It also means that divers must be very careful about planning decompression schedules, or how quickly they come back up, because otherwise it can, and does, have deadly consequences. Dave Shaw could never really be considered just a normal guy. He'd always lived an interesting life. Not content with boring, he constantly spent his life finding ways to challenge himself and push his boundaries. According to his website, Dave was born in Australia in 1954, before moving to Hong Kong in 1989 at the age of 35 to become an airline pilot for Cathay Pacific, who he continued to fly for until his death. Married to Anne, who had been the head of an international high school in Hong Kong, they had 2 children together, Stephen and Lisa, both adults who are now living in Australia. Dave had long held a passion for deep water diving, technical diving, diving for wrecks and other items of interest, and general scuba diving, having been introduced to it by his son. Shaw was known to modify his equipment and use diving equipment for dives that weren't originally intended. He was somewhat of a maverick when it came to diving. His website says, "Depth in a dive is of secondary importance to Dave. He is primarily interested in exploring, to be where no other man has explored before. It seems that to achieve that goal, greater depths are becoming a must." Dave Shaw loved diving and wanted to explore where others hadn't, setting records along the way, especially in Bushman's Hole, where he holds the records for depth on a rebreather, depth in a cave on a rebreather, depths at an altitude on a rebreather, and depths running a line. Little did Dave know that his exploration and sense of duty would cost him his life in extraordinary circumstances. Deon Dreyer was just 20 years old in December of 1994, but he'd already logged about 200 successful recreational dives before he was invited to take part in a potentially record-breaking dive by world-famous diver Nuno Gomes. Thrilled to be invited to take part, Dreyer's father told the journalist that while sitting around a barbecue with his family before the dive, Deon had said, if he had a choice of how to go out in life, he'd like to go out diving. Little did Dreyer know that his fate was listening. During the dive, Dreyer was lost by the team on the ascent back to the surface at about 50 metres, with the cause of death being assigned to either oxygen toxicity or hypercapnia, induced by the high work rate of breathing at depth. Diving at these depths can be incredibly dangerous, and Deon Dreyer had paid with his life. Fast forward 10 years later, and Nuno Gomes had become the world record holder for the deepest cave and sea dive, with the cave dive being done in Bushman's Hole. That was, of course, until he was beaten by Dave Shaw. In fact, to tie these fateful three together, Dave Shaw beat Gomes' record on the 28th of October 2004. Shaw at this point is a skilled and renowned technical diver. However, his elation at setting new records was overshadowed by a grim discovery. Recalling it, Shaw said, "When I saw him, I swam to him. He was lying on his back with his dive equipment on. He was in a wetsuit and he still had his fins and mask on. His face was bone. His arms were floating. My first thought was to try and bring him up. I knelt next to him, but he was stuck in the silt. I started to puff and pant, which is not a good thing at that depth. The important thing is that Deon was no longer lost." The new record holder, Dave Shaw, had tragically come across the remains of young Deon. Shaw initially did try to recover the body there and then, but something wasn't quite right, so he decided to abandon it and come back at a later date. Shaw spoke about the pain of losing a child, and subsequently promised Deon's parents that he would go back for him, aware of the dangers, but determined to do the right thing for his fallen colleague. Shaw enlisted a team of 25 to plan the dive to the very last detail. After all, Shaw was a record-holding, highly experienced diver. On the 8th of January 2005, Dave Shaw returned for his mission to recover Deon. His team of 25 was stationed at various points in order to bring Deon's remains to the surface. Emergency breathing stations were set up at various points in case somebody's supply failed. Before descending, Dave made one final instruction. If something went wrong, then nobody was to be sent to recover him. Equipped with a video camera, Shaw didn't realise he was about to film his own death. Despite the initial stages of the dive going well, things started to go wrong when Shaw reached Deon's body. The plan, as careful as it had been, hadn't conceived that the body of Deon might come loose from the mud and float, rather than staying at the bottom. Getting a body bag over a body that's stuck to the floor is easier than trying to get it over a rolling floating mass at 800 feet in the dark. Tragically, in his effort to secure Deon, Shaw got his lines tangled and got caught within them. With the effort expended on trying to free himself, Shaw was struggling to breathe and shortly passed out. As reported by his diving partner, Don Shirley, in his report, the light on Shaw's camera could be seen at the bottom of the cave, motionless, and in Shirley's own words, a motionless diver at that depth usually means a dead diver. Tragically, Dave Shaw had passed away.
He was still moving out and he was still working right up to the end. And what he found was he got caught up in the line. He was moving away, the body and everything was actually towing behind him. And he had to then try and untangle himself from that in a very restricted light position with a very high sort of breathing rate. And he basically succumbed to all the pressures that you've got at that sort of time. And his breathing slowly faded and Dave passed away.
Shirley and the rest of the diving team had to make an agonising 10-hour ascent back to the surface in order to make sure they didn't suffer permanent damage from the pressure. They did this all while knowing their friend couldn't return with them. Shirley described an attempt, at first, to go and get his friend, but it was deeper than he'd ever been before, and in the descent started to vomit and feel faint. Understanding that if he had continued, he would have joined Dave Shaw, Shirley made the right call to abandon the attempt. All of the bodies were eventually recovered, and the heartbreaking final moments of Dave Shaw were captured on video. The video is so distressing that everyone who was there with him that day can't bear to watch it back. The waters in Bushman's Hole remain ghostly and eerily calm. The darkness of the depth of its water continues to hold breathtaking scenery, but sadly, it also holds the final resting place of Deon Dreyer and Dave Shaw.